There is something on the moon that sounds made up, not a secret base, not an alien structure, not some blurry shape people argue over online. Two giant canyons, not just big cracks, not just long scars. Real canyons on a scale comparable in width and depth to Earth's Grand Canyon. And according to scientists, they were not carved slowly over millions of years. They were carved in less than 10 minutes. That is what makes this one of the most violent things the moon has ever preserved. Because on Earth, when you hear the word canyon, you think of time. You think of rivers, erosion, pressure, collapse, layer after layer being worn down over ages so long that no human mind can really feel them. But the moon is different. The moon does not have rivers cutting through rock for millions of years. It does not have rain, forests, or weather slowly reshaping the land. The moon keeps damage. It keeps impacts. It keeps scars almost exactly where violence left them. And nearly 4 billion years ago, something slammed into the moon near its south pole with enough force to create the Schrödinger impact basin, a crater about 320 kilometers wide. That impact alone would already be insane. But it did not stop at making one giant basin. The collision blasted huge amounts of rock out across the surface. That ejecta came crashing back down so violently that it gouged out two enormous canyons now called Vallis Schrödinger and Vallis Planck. These are not small features that only sound dramatic in a headline. One canyon is roughly 270 kilometers long, about 20 kilometers wide, and around 2.7 kilometers deep. The other is even more extreme in places, around 27 kilometers wide and 3.5 kilometers deep, with parts of the system stretching out to about 860 kilometers. So when scientists compare them to the Grand Canyon, they are not trying to dress the story up. They really are talking about canyon scales destruction, but the size is only half the story. The part that actually feels insane is the speed. The study found that the rock carving these canyons slammed into the lunar surface at roughly 1 kilometer per second. That is not slow collapse. That is not drifting debris. That is a bombardment, a storm of rock hitting hard enough to tear giant trenches into the moon. And all of that happened in less than 10 minutes. Think about that. On Earth, the Grand Canyon took millions of years. On the moon, two giant canyons were carved fast enough that the whole event would have ended before most people finish a short video. That completely changes the feeling of the moon, because the moon usually looks quiet, still, cold, dead. But once you know this happened, the surface stops looking peaceful. It starts looking like the aftermath of repeated disasters, not a calm world, a world that remembers being hit. And that is what makes the moon such a brutal archive of the early solar system. Earth is alive. Earth recycles itself. Plate tectonics pull old crust down. Wind and water erase things. Forests grow over scars. Oceans bury evidence. The moon does almost none of that. So when something catastrophic happens there, the mark can survive for billions of years. It is like a museum of impact violence. And this story gets even better when you realize where these canyons are. They sit near the lunar south polar region, the same general part of the moon that matters so much for future exploration and Artemis-era interest. Scientists say the way the ejecta was thrown out may actually help preserve access to older lunar materials nearby, instead of burying everything under a deep blanket of debris. So this is not just a story about destruction. It is also a story about opportunity. A colossal impact may have carved out giant canyons in minutes, and at the same time helped leave behind clues that future missions may be able to study. And that is why I love this idea, because it turns the moon from something familiar into something violent again. Everyone thinks they know the moon, but most people do not picture a place where an impact once hit so hard that it created 2 Grand Canyon-sized scars in less than 10 minutes. The energy from that event has even been compared to roughly 130 times the combined yield of the world's nuclear arsenal. So no, the moon is not just a quiet gray ball hanging above Earth. Near its south pole are 2 giant wounds from one of the most savage moments in its history. A blast powerful enough to tear open the surface. A bombardment fast enough to carve canyons in minutes. And a reminder that even the most familiar object in our sky can still hide something almost impossible